Hello and welcome. We pretty much talked about the most basic concepts of functions, the basics of them. There are some more advanced concepts related to functions like function pointers and static and automatic static variables, recursion, but those things are going to be discussed in an advanced class. Now that we know the basics of functions, I want to provide you with a challenge so that you get familiar with creating and using functions. So you're going to actually write a number of different functions. We need to start getting some practice writing these different functions. And why do we want to write functions? Because it makes our code more organized, more modular, and you can avoid duplication. We went through all the advantages. So the purpose of this assignment is to get you familiar with functions, understand these advantages. So you're going to write 3 functions, and you can have all these functions defined in a single program. I want you to write a function which finds the greatest common divisor of 2 non-negative integer values and returns the result. So you can create a function name called GDC. The function should take 2 integers as parameters. The algorithm to find the greatest common divisor is pretty simple. You can look online or find any math book. What you should be noticing in these challenges is that they're getting more and more difficult, right? I'm not going to provide you with every single hint. You have to come up with the GDC algorithm. It's very easy though and very common. It's a common function. Have this function take data and have it return data. 2 non-negative integer values it accepts. You can either check for negative integers if you want, or you don't have to. It's up to you. I also want you to write a function to calculate the absolute value of a number. The absolute value of a number is positive, the positive value. So if you have a number -5, the absolute value of that is 5. If you have a positive number 5, the absolute value is 5. It's a very simple function. Actually, the implementation of this function, all you're going to need to do is really check if it's less than 0, and if it is, just make sure it's positive. If it's a variable, you just say x equals -x. You'll want to test this function with ints and floats to make sure it works. To make the absolute value function more usable, I would have it take a parameter as a float and return a float. That way you can actually use it with an int and you won't lose any precision. If you pass an int in there, it's automatically going to convert it to a float. And if you had an int have the parameter as an int and returned an int, if you tried to use a float, you would lose data. So make it take floats. The third function that you're going to write is going to compute the square root of a number. Don't use any helper or any standard library functions. Do the square root with an algorithm that you create. I also want you to check the parameters passed to this method. If you have any values passed to the function and the values are negative, I want you to display a message and I want you to return a -1. What this means is you can actually use the other function you created, absolute value, as a helper function. That's what you usually, when one function uses another function, it sometimes is referred to as a helper function. So the square root function, I want you to invoke the absolute value function. You can use that to test whether or not the arguments are negative. You can also actually use it when you do your computation of the square root. Even though you're returning a negative number, you still want to call the absolute value function when you're performing the square root itself. So these are the 3 functions I want you to write. You're going to be exposed to creating, declaring your functions. I want you to have function prototypes at the top of the file because remember, that's good convention. I want you to return the correct data. I want you to pass data to these functions. So you're going to have to understand the whole entire function signature. And then you're going to invoke these functions. When you actually go and start testing the program, make sure you have a lot of test cases. Call the GDC function with multiple values. Call it with negative numbers. Call the absolute value function with many different values. You can test all of this by just invoking the functions in the main function. And then you can also have normal output of this. I'll show you my solution in the next lecture, but think about this. Get a little planning out of the way. Try to figure out what functions are going to return, even though I gave you a lot of hints here, what they're going to return and how they're going to take the data. Understand function declarations and so forth. Good luck.